Yeah.
Shout, I was going to say, shout if you can't see it. Make that slideshow. Right, lovely. So PFAS. So yeah, as Matt said, we'll kind of do the what, where, why, what the issues are. I'll do a brief bit on our stance, which, to be honest, is kind of ever evolving, really. So there's probably not kind of a detailed thing particularly to say about our stance. But for me, I think the main point of the meeting, and hopefully what you guys thought was too, just to hopefully give you a bit of knowledge about what PFAS is, where you find it, what the problems are with it, because I think it is something that is going to become more talked about in the industry. We've seen it from other insurers, various different bits as well. For anyone who doesn't know, I'm very new to Zurich, so I've only been here 3 months, but I was at Allianz for 16 years before that. And that was certainly something that was being talked about over there as well. So it is very much a kind of industry hot topic, really, at the minute, I think it's fair to say. So firstly, we'll just cover what PFAS are. So as Matt said, pretty well, to be fair, they are oh, there you go. I've stumbled already. Perfluoroalkyl and polyfluoroalkyl substances. So hence why people just shorten that to PFAS, because it's a bit of a mouthful in its own right. Essentially, another way of looking at them is forever chemicals. So it's a term used to describe a load of man-made chemicals. Essentially, you've got PFOA, PFOS, and a brand name Gen X, which all kind of fall under the PFAS family. PFOA is perfluorooctanoic acid, and PFOS is perfluorooctane sulfonate. So again, you can see why people use the shorter abbreviations for those. So I'm going to stop trying to pronounce those because I'm not very good at it. So I'm just going to refer to everything from kind of PFAS from now on. That just covers that range of chemicals known as forever chemicals, essentially. The reason they're used, they're extremely difficult to break down. They're extremely chemically stable. They can kind of exist for hundreds, possibly thousands of years. Essentially, no one really knows yet because no one's been around long enough since these things were kind of introduced. They do bioaccumulate, so they basically accumulate in the human body, and they do stay there, and that potentially can lead to health problems as well. So the definitions vary. As I said there, you've got PFOA and PFOS as well as Gen X. There's various different things that kind of fall into the group of PFAS products, and essentially there's probably about 12 to 15,000 different chemicals that you would class as PFAS. And essentially they are any fluorinated substance that contains at least one fully fluorinated methyl or methylene carbon atom, which is very sciencey, and I won't even remotely claim to understand what that means. But I think the key thing to take away from it is essentially the forever chemicals bit. They are known as that because they just last for ages. And you'll kind of see why in a minute, and the uses that they are put to, essentially. So they can be released through production and waste streams into the air, water, and soil. They resist natural degradation, as we've said. The fluorine bonds are the strongest in nature. They have a very high resistance to thermal, chemical, biological, and radiation degradation. So they're pretty hard to get rid of, / almost impossible. The use for them is because they are effectively or they were certainly effectively seen as a wonder product. Because they're thermally resistant, you can use them in firefighting. Because they're chemically resistant, you can use them as a stain repellent. Because they're water resistant, you can use them on clothing. They are used in an awful lot of things, as we'll see in a couple slides further on. And there's just a little graphic there about essentially how things would how PFAS would move around the environment, getting into water systems, and obviously then kind of getting into the environment around that way. So where are they found? So this is it's a bit of a busy map, but essentially, hopefully you can make out the colours well enough. But you've got where there's a red dot, there's known PFAS contamination. So you'll note that pretty much England is entirely contaminated with PFAS. You've got a purple dot, which is a known PFAS user. You've got the sort of, I don't know, teal, bluey, greeny color, presumptive contamination, where it can be kind of pretty much guaranteed that there is contamination of PFAS in those areas. And then you've got the kind of triangle shape, which is a PFAS manufacturing facility. I guess the takeaway from that is that this stuff has got into an awful lot of places, particularly the UK, or more particularly England, to be fair. There's big concentrations across Europe. I suspect that is replicated in America, Canada. You might find some countries where there isn't too much of it, but generally there's going to be a pretty big concentrations of it in many of the major economies around the world, I would say. So where do you find it? So as we said, forever family of chemicals. So it can be both water and oil resistant. It forms dense, stable, impermeable films on surfaces, hence the use as things like waterproof clothing, things like that. It's stable in both chemical and high temperature environments. So you get things like non-stick pans. Obviously, they're subject to heat, but it's stable in that. So your fried egg stays in the pan and it comes out of it easy at the end of it. It reduces surface tension in oil and water, making other chemicals more efficient. So it can be used as a combination with other chemicals. It's UV resistant. So you certainly did, I'm not sure if it's still the case, but you did find it in things like suntan lotions and stuff like that as well. And it reduces friction, lubricates. So again, those kind of anything sort of non-stick and stuff like that. Food packaging as well. So makes it grease resistant, that kind of stuff. So yeah, you will find it. There's a whole list of trades there on the right-hand side. You probably come across, I don't know, at least 3 or 4 things from that list every single day, I would imagine. Cosmetics, cookware, food packaging, clothing, carpets. It's used as kind of stain resistant stuff on carpets, same on furnishings. It's used in firefighting foam, outdoor gear with your water resistant stuff. So not just the clothing, but also things like tents. It really is used in an awful lot of industries and an awful lot of products. So the health concerns, so as we said, being a forever chemical and one that basically can accumulate in the human body, that does lead to potential health issues. So you get things like increased cholesterol levels, changes in liver enzymes, lower infant birth weights, increased risk of various types of cancer. So the ones listed there, you've got breast, kidney, thyroid, increased risk of high blood pressure, so cardiovascular disease, preeclampsia in pregnant women, and it has been seen to produce a decreased vaccine response in children, so effectively lowered immunity as well. So pretty serious side effects. Cancer's probably being the big ones there, but certainly can cause a range of issues if these things are in big volumes in your body. So yes, in terms of the kind of insurance side of it, the potential exposures that we would see effectively in our world. So in terms of employers' liability, PFAS manufacturers would be a fairly obvious exposure. If you're day-to-day using products that contain these chemicals, you're potentially going to be handling the chemicals themselves. You can inhale the fumes from the chemicals. It gets in your body that way, absorbed through the skin, ingest through the skin. So yeah, as a manufacturer, you certainly have that exposure. Anyone not manufacturing the chemical itself but using it in any of the products, so clothing, food packaging, etc., again could have exposure in the same way. Anyone really working with anything that contains PFAS in it, there's potential for them to have greater exposure than the rest of us effectively. In terms of public liability, again, an escape of that kind of substance, given the type of substance it is, once it escapes from somewhere, it's very difficult to clean up. You can imagine you can't burn it to get rid of it. You can't mix it with water particularly well. It sort of sits on top of it. It's really difficult to kind of remove from an area once it has broken out of where it's supposed to be. And then it takes ages to degrade as well. So, it can really cause a kind of pollution type issue from that sense. It can obviously cause injury or damage to individuals as well. And again, you've got your inhalation, skin absorption, ingestion issue too. And in terms of products, various products that we've sort of mentioned before, food packaging, textiles, clothing, medical devices. What I didn't know, but did find out, asthma inhalers. So they use PFAS as the propellant. There's nothing that they can use particularly well to replace that at this stage, which is quite an interesting one. So I think that clearly that's something people are working on. But it does pop up in a few surprising areas, I guess. Asthma inhalers being one that probably surprised me most, given it's something that you're essentially firing down your throat into your lungs. So for it to contain PFAS, not ideal. And again, as we said, inhalation, skin absorption, ingestion, the issues as to how it gets into your body. So I guess sort of for you guys as brokers, the things to kind of consider when you're potentially talking to customers about whether they do have any exposure to PFAS. I think hopefully it's something that people are going to become more aware of. Hopefully people will look into replace things that contain PFAS with alternatives. But I guess the type of things to consider, obviously the type of land site a company is based on. There are various kind of sites where these have been used a lot in the past. If you imagine, old fire stations and things like that in training scenarios and things, they'll potentially be using it to put out fires. Training the firefighter to use it in a safe environment before using it in a live environment. That PFAS will hang around. There's various things. I've insured a couple of old fire stations in my time that have been converted into residential, that have been converted into office, that kind of thing. So that's something to bear in mind. Neighbours. So you've potentially got an exposure from a neighbour. So if you've got a neighbour that uses PFAS in their product, if they're a manufacturer of it, etc., clearly that represents a potential exposure. And then what the organisation itself does. So their supply chain, probably the big one. Do they actually know necessarily everything that is in the product that their supplier is supplying them to incorporate into their own product? So ingredients, raw materials, the components that are purchased, that kind of stuff. Cleaning and maintenance activities, what fire extinguishing media do you use? Clearly both of those could contain PFAS. Fire extinguishers and foam, fire suppression and that kind of stuff are all things to consider. What products they make, the supply and their customer base, and essentially kind of how do they know if it contains PFAS really. The starting point there is SDS, so the safety data sheets. That would kind of give you a clue as to the chemicals that are in whatever product that you're talking about at the time. And clearly, you can ask the supplier, you can arrange sample and testing and that kind of stuff as well, just to see what is in the products that you've got. And then I guess once it's been identified, how it's managed and the controls in place are really key. As we touched on before, if volumes of PFAS kind of escape where they're supposed to be, they're very difficult to clean up. So having kind of good controls in place for storage and that kind of stuff is a key kind of thing to consider. And then hopefully a plan to replace or substitute the product or the chemical that they're using or the component that they're using, etc., that contains PFAS with a non-PFAS alternative. So where am I likely to find it? I think we've kind of touched on probably quite a few of these already, but essentially kind of almost everywhere. This definitely is in no way an exhaustive list, but clearly someone who manufactures or stores PFAS chemicals, you're definitely going to find it there. the AFFF firefighting foam. So the AFFF is aqueous film forming foam, which is a bit of a mouthful, but I actually managed to say that one quite well, to be fair. But they are, the foam kind of forms a film essentially over the fire to smother it. So, and that foam contains PFAS. So companies who've been involved in or are involved in PFAS litigation in the past have probably had, well, will have had some kind of exposure to PFAS. Not only people that manufacture the foams, but obviously people that use them. So you will find the foam often in fire suppression systems, so cooking range protection, that kind of stuff. Where the foam is likely to be used by fire authorities, so we sort of touched on it before, fire stations are probably going to have reasonable storage of these because they're going to need a lot to put out a particular fire. If it's a fire that needs putting out with some sort of foam system because it's a chemical fire or something like that. Anyone who treats products with PFAS or uses PFAS chemicals in their production processes. So we mentioned packaging, food and drink packaging, textiles, furnishings. The list is not endless, but it's big. I think it's fair to say. And then energy sector, water industry, plastics manufacturing, agriculture. You can find PFAS in all of these industries as well. So there's a range of industries, a range of products. It really can turn up in some surprising places, but those are kind of hopefully some of the key ones to give you an idea. But just to reiterate, it's definitely not an exhaustive list. The good news is there are some substitutions for these things, which is good. Some of the major places where you find these kind of things are airports. So clearly plane fires and things like that. You've got fuel. You've got clearly a big risk to life. If nothing else as well, you've obviously got a very busy kind of location. Clearly at somewhere like Gatwick, Heathrow, they're going to be wanting to put out fires very quickly, so they use something that is going to do that as fast as possible. That used to be foam that included PFAS. A lot of these have switched to F3 foams, so they're fluorine-free foams. And you can see a list of airports that use them there. There's a little bit of blurb there about London Heathrow, who've used this in a couple of aircraft fires, and it worked perfectly. So the replacement foam works. The cleanup costs were basically zero. As it says there, the tests of the fire groundwater runoff by the Environment Agency, they were fine, and they were basically allowed to wash the foam down the drains, which you absolutely would not be able to do if it was PFAS in the foam. So there is a substitute. That substitute is getting kind of more and more widely used, and hopefully we'll see that kind of uptake of substitutes continue. So food and beverage packaging. So this is a big one, but one where probably people have seen a lot of changes anyway. A lot of it probably not brought about by PFAS itself really, but brought about by switching to effectively more environmentally friendly alternatives. So you see there things like pizza boxes, burger boxes, etc. Would have had it before, and PFAS was in there for this kind of grease stain protection, insulation properties. And alternatives, you get things like vegetable parchment, straw, elephant grass, bamboo, palm leaf, biowax coatings. And there are quite a few companies that have made the change to alternatives as well. We kind of covered off one of these, but examples where there's currently no alternatives. So semiconductors, so the etchings and coatings on there, that's all the thermal resistant and all that kind of stuff. So there's no current replacement for that. Acoustic membrane moisture protection. So at the minute, there's not really any alternatives for that, and some medical devices, and we mentioned inhalers earlier. So yeah, not kind of substitutions for everything, but certainly, food and packaging is a big one. Clearly, if you've got something that you're eating, which is resting on a surface treated with PFAS, then there's a very obvious link to how that's going to get into your body. So that's probably one of the kind of key ones to look out for in terms of alternatives. So how are they regulated? So there are various kind of international regulations in terms of those. So you've got the Stockholm Convention on Persistent Organic Pollutants. So at EU level, again, the EU regulation on persistent organic pollutants, UK, very similar, and US as well. As always with the US, you get different regulations in different states, but they've got the PFAS Action Act, which seeks to regulate PFAS more robustly at a federal level, so across the whole of the country. Excuse me. Will, shut up. So in terms of regulating it, in the UK, there's limited regulation in place at the minute. Apologies for the dog going nuts. I don't know what he's barking at. You've got limited regulation in place in the UK, the persistent organic pollutions regulations that we mentioned, water supply quality regulations. The water supply is an interesting one because essentially at the minute the kind of rules rely on water being wholesome, and there's no specific level for PFAS kind of mentioned within that. It is something that is monitored, and water companies do have to advise if they, in their monitoring, that their PFAS is over a certain level, but it's probably not quite as robust as you might hope it would be. There's, clearly they're not removing all PFAS. That's incredibly difficult to do. They do at least have a target, and it is at least monitored. And it's quite interesting. I had a survey round from Anglian Water the other week, just it's like an annual survey thing they were doing, and one of the questions in there was what do you know about PFAS? So I think they're kind of, and how important it is to you that it's removed from water. Give me 1 second. Apology. Sorry about that. People walking past, dog went bananas. Where were we? So Anglian Water sent a kind of survey question that included stuff about PFAS, which I thought was relatively interesting. I think people are kind of hearing and seeing more about it and kind of getting more aware of it. It's definitely something that is on people's minds, and certainly in terms of water, that is a big area. Clearly, we all drink water every day, and if there's high levels of PFAS in there, it's something to be a little concerned about. I hope I'm not genuinely terrifying everyone on the call, by the way, but it is kind of the situation is what it is, really. You've got the UK REACH regime, which in terms of that's basically in terms of consumers. So consumers having the right to know whether products contain harmful chemicals. And then you've got kind of HSE, so an RMOA, so that's a regulatory management options analysis. So that's essentially just a big paper on PFAS, an assessment of it, likely health and environmental risks. And if you Google that, if you're in any way interested in that level of detail, you can Google that and actually access that report quite easily. So there's recommendations included, clearly limiting the use of PFAS in foams, textiles, furniture and cleaning products. From 1st of January 23, the use of PFOA foams is only allowed on sites where all releases can be contained. I'm not sure that there's really any site where you could guarantee that you could contain all of the release. So it's something that is pretty pretty kind of locked down there, I guess. And then from 4th of July next year, all uses of those kind of foams will be prohibited. So they will be kind of done with at that point. So there's various regulation, I guess, in place at both an international and UK level, and it's becoming more and more regulated, I think it's fair to say. So litigation. So I guess probably the main thing to sort of touch on really. Clearly, if no one knows about it and there's no litigation, yeah, it's a problem. But in our world, obviously, the litigation is kind of the key thing, and what we're seeing in terms of claims and that kind of stuff. So there has been claims in the US in the past. So there's DuPont, where in 2001, residents of Parksburg, West Virginia, made a claim against DuPont, alleging that their water was contaminated with PFOA. So the science panel that kind of looked into it, they found a probable link between PFOA and 6 diseases, and they settled 3,500 personal injury claims for a total of $671 million. So huge sums of money, basically about $200,000 per injury claim. And then in Minnesota, there was the state of Minnesota against 3M. 3M and DuPont, both kind of big manufacturers of PFAS, essentially. So they alleged that the pollution of the state's natural resources, including 100 or more than 100 miles of the Mississippi River and drinking water, they alleged pollution with PFAS. They sought $5 billion for cleanup costs. 3M ended up settling for $850 million in 2018 on the eve of the trial. So, huge sums of money we're talking about here. I know it's sort of easy to go, well, it's America. All claims are huge sums of money in America, but as we'll see in a minute, there are kind of claims wider as well. I've not actually seen this film. The person who kind of did this presentation originally mentioned it. I don't know if anyone's seen it. It is on Netflix, apparently, in the UK, but a film called Dark Waters. I'm told it's actually a good film, as well as being a bit kind of insurance-ish related, I guess, because it's essentially, I think it's about the DuPont situation, and I think they were sort of burying chemical kind of stores, effectively, containers, tanks. They buried it to sort of get rid of it, and that ended up polluting the water in the area. And that film is kind of all about that, and it's supposed to be quite good, but I haven't actually got around to watching it yet, so I can neither confirm nor deny. And then internationally, so we have seen other claims as well. I should point out that these aren't Zurich claims; these are just claims that we're aware of. So in Australia, you've got the Catherine Oakey and Williamstown class actions. So actions by property owners against the Department of Defence regarding foam used at Air Force bases. So that was a settlement of 212.5 million Australian dollars in 2020 for property value loss, distress and vexation. It's the brilliantly named Wagga Wagga, Wodonga, Darwin, Townsville, Edinburgh and Ballsbrook class actions. So again, actions by landowners and again Air Force bases. Again, a big settlement, 132.7 million Australian dollars, and that involved 30,000 landowners at 7 sites. And then the Wreck Bay Aboriginal Community Council class action. So again, class action by Indigenous Australians regarding the contamination of land with PFAS following foam use. So claiming loss in property value, distress and vexation. I think that one's an ongoing one, which is why there's no settlement amount there. So, there are claims around. You've got a few examples there. There's a few more examples. So in Belgium, 3M again. So you remember them from the US example. So they reached a settlement, 571 million in 2022. So in Sweden, 2023, Swedish Supreme Court confirmed that high level of PFAS in the blood of residents constitutes personal injury. So that kind of unlocks potential for more PFAS lawsuits. And then again in Europe, PFAS found at 17,000 sites across the UK. So if you remember back to that map with the red dots, it was kind of all over England. And that revealed the scale of the forever chemical pollution across the UK and Europe. And there's an article in The Guardian. I can send a link to that later if people are interested in seeing it. And in India, 2016 study found levels of 1.3 parts, I think it's parts per trillion, to 15.9 in the Ganges River. So that is a river that basically the catchment area contains 400 million people, which is an awfully large amount of people. So, you know, there's huge impact potentially from that. And then Vento, Italy, contamination of drinking water, and that was from a manufacturing PFAS site called Miteni. So there's various examples, quite a few examples really, where problems have been kind of revealed or claims have happened, settled, ongoing. So that, you know, there's more and more litigation coming about internationally as a result of PFAS. So PFAS claims in the UK, Buncefield oil storage explosion, which probably a lot of you will remember, I think. It woke me up. I live not too far away from Hemel Hempstead, well, far enough away, about 20 miles away. But it sounded like a small bomb going off where I was. But in the firefighting foam they used to put that out, there was basically PFAS in that. So you had 32,000 litres of firefighting foam, which was used a minute. So 32,000 litres a minute, which is a huge amount of foam. Three Valleys water detected PFAS in a borehole close to the site. So in 2010, Hertfordshire Oil Storage Limited, that should say fined 1.45 million and 1 million costs for causing pollution to enter controlled waters. As with all of these things, it falls back onto the person that effectively where the fire happened. So the firefighters go there to put that out. They put out the fire, which is their main concern. But once they've done that, anything that they use to put the fire out, etc., it becomes the responsibility of the person where the fire existed, because it was their kind of fire that's been put out, if that makes sense. So in 2023, Lee Day, representing retired firefighter diagnosed with cancer, someone who was exposed to PFOA during their career as a firefighter. So, you know, that we have seen claims in the UK as well as those international ones that we mentioned before. I guess before we do the summary, I'll just briefly sort of touch on the Zurich view on it. So as I mentioned, it's kind of an ongoing piece at the minute. I think it's safe to say that we are taking a kind of relatively, hopefully, sensible view at the minute and trying to underwrite around these. You know, the real main problems are PFAS manufacturers. Chemical manufacturing is not an area that we've kind of play in or particularly interested in. So we don't really feel that we've got any exposure there. Certainly not in my world, at least. Potentially internationally, we may have, maybe in London we do, but certainly in the regions and things like that, it's not really an issue for us. We're considering it on effectively the largest risks at the minute, so risks with a 100 million turnover, and effectively we kind of really having to think about those cases and whether there is any PFAS exposure, and where we think there's a level of kind of unacceptable exposure, then we are in some instances applying an exclusion in respect to PFAS. I think we've only put one on so far, so you know we're restricting it to a relatively high level. I don't at this stage certainly see it as something that we put on, you know, every policy or anything like that. It is something that, as we always do, really, we try and kind of underwrite our way through it rather than just apply blanket exclusions or anything. Have seen in the market a few examples recently where Aviva put exclusions on. One was on a food packaging manufacturer that we saw that had come to market that had a PFAS exclusion on it. As I mentioned, I was at Allianz prior to Zurich. and it's something that they were talking about as well. So I think it's something that's going to become kind of more frequently talked about in our world, and probably more. We'll see things more, exclusions and stuff like that, and certainly more considerations of it when underwriting things, and potentially be impacted by reinsurers as well. When reinsurance renewals come up, that's a lot of these things tend to start in the reinsurance world. They obviously are always kind of scanning the horizon, if you like, to see where future problems could come from. And this is certainly something that's very, very much on their radars as well. So you may see things develop as insurers see or begin those kind of reinsurance negotiations as well. So I guess in summary, that forever chemicals, if you don't remember that it's called PFAS, but you do remember forever chemicals, then that's probably no bad thing. It's certainly easier to pronounce forever chemicals than the full description of what PFAS is. So they're widely used across industries. They do persist in land, air, and water, and as we said, they bioaccumulate in the body, and they can be associated with a variety of health concerns. Common usages: oil stain, grease, water resistance, firefighting, non-stick surfaces. So you see them in an awful lot of products. Those include clothing, textiles, furnishings, cookware, cosmetics, electronics, food packaging, paints, and adhesives. So a real big range of stuff where you'll find them. And that is basically it. Unless anybody has any questions. I hope that was useful. I know it kind of goes through them quite quickly. I know I struggled to pronounce quite a few of the things at various points, and then my dog went mental about 15 minutes ago as well. So it's an interesting presentation, but hopefully there's some interesting points in there. Hopefully people kind of picked up on a few things that they didn't know before. But if you've got any questions, as long as they're not too sciencey, I will try and answer them. If I can't answer them, I can take them away and try and find out.
I'll ask you a question, Stuart, if you don't mind.
Yeah, go for it.
Obviously, thanks for doing that. I mean, I knew nothing about this, if I'm being honest, before I came into this room. So from that point of view, it's been worthwhile. Now, the thing that you highlighted there was the asthma inhaler, which I've currently got one in my pocket.
Right.
I've used an asthma inhaler since the age of about 3, and I'm 53 now. So when I've come in here, I've learned that is probably, whilst it's doing good for me, it's probably potentially leading to a problem. I mean, I'm not bothered, I'm not worried, but should I be, is the answer to that question. I mean, you can't answer that, you're not a doctor, but does things like this not just sow a bit of confusion or panicking people a little bit?
Yeah, I think they can do. I mean, I think, I guess we could end up panicking about everything all the time, and there's so many different things going on in the world and all of that sort of stuff. I guess certainly there's no intention on my part to panic anyone about any of this stuff, but I think it is something that is recognized as a problem. The very nature of the chemicals themselves, if you think about something being waterproof, it's waterproof, which means you can't simply wash it away. It's not going to dissolve in water, which means it hangs around. They do have thermal properties as well, so you can't kind of cook it away. You can't heat it and then it disappears. Because they are chemicals that are man-made, and they're very, very strong chemicals, that they're very, very difficult to get rid of, and they don't kind of naturally break down either. So it is something that I think rightly has kind of raised concern at, well, all kinds of levels, really. You saw all those kind of international treaties and stuff. So I think it's right that people are aware of it, and that people kind of appreciate the extent of where we will see these things, because they can unfortunately have health impacts. And ideally, I guess these things will all be substituted with a much safer alternative as quickly as possible. But it is clearly a wide range of stuff that is affected. I know that was a bit waffly and didn't sort of really answer your question, but
No,
I'm not.
I don't think it'd be a case of
I
last
think we
minute.
just wanted a little meeting room last time, and then we can just go for lunch afterwards. So, if that's all right with you.
Sorry, I didn't hear the start of that.
All right, that's good news. No,
That's someone on
no,
the phone,
well, that's
isn't it?
you know.
Adam, I think you need to go on mute. We can hear your conversation.
Thought I was being invited out for lunch then as well. I'm disappointed now. Did anyone else have any questions at all?
Hi, Stuart. Andy Pearson here. As far as firefighting foam, I'm just casting my mind back to 2003 and the barter line versus RSA issue, if you can remember that claim.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that one was firefighting foam, and the issue was pollution, where Barterline wanted their public liability policy to act, and it was decided, or RSA kicked it out, and it was deemed a pollution claim rather than a public liability claim. So how are we dealing with pollution claims? Do your policies include pollution?
So I mean, so the Barterline kind of set a precedent. I won't claim to be an expert in that. So there is EIL cover, and I can't remember the name of the other cover that kind of is designed to pick up those kind of issues, because they are generally excluded from a liability policy, is my understanding. I don't think kind of anything PFAS really changes that situation. So I think the situations as it arose at Barterline and kind of the way that was dealt with, it has continued since then, and I don't think this changes any of that, to be honest.
Okay, but can policyholders still buy an EIL policy?
Yeah, I'll be honest, I don't actually know if Zurich offer it, but my understanding is certainly it is available in the market still. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
I know Allianz effectively pulled out of it because they didn't really sell any, if I'm totally honest. It was something that, you know, people kind of claimed that they potentially needed, but it was one of those ones where, as an underwriter, you were possibly nervous about the ones where people did want it because it was clearly high exposures, and actually there wasn't really anyone else buying it. So you ended up kind of almost being selected against, because the risks you were seeing were the really heavy ones that you perhaps were nervous on, and there wasn't that pool of other risks to kind of back that up. So I think Allianz don't offer it anymore, but I'm sure there is availability elsewhere in the market.
Yeah, because I think the big problem is the fire brigade are protected by Crown indemnity, so there's no claim going back to them. It's just the person who has the fire.
Yeah, exactly, and that's it, and that's why I think it's going to be key for people to kind of understand the issue in terms of the foams that they're using, and what the foams that are in their fire suppression systems. The foams, you know, they can't do anything about what the fire fighters use, but clearly kind of managing their exposure to the chemicals that they have that foams would be needed to be used on in the event of a fire. I think that's going to be really key for people.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Stuart, for that.
All right. Any more?
Stu, could you do you mind sending me the presentation, and then I can send it on to Nikki with the recording so it can be shared around? So it had a couple of links in there to some articles which I think could be useful. Is that all right? Yeah,
no worries. Yeah, I'm not sure if because I think I have to send it around as a PDF, but I can certainly extract the links and attach them to it anyway. So yeah, no worries.
Brilliant. Well, I just want to say thank you, Stuart, for doing that. That's been fantastic and a bit of a eye-opener for us all, I think. And thanks to you, Matt, for organising it as well.
No, not a problem. And you know, thanks for everyone turning up en masse. It's good. I think we've all probably learned something from this conversation. I'm off to chuck away my non-stick frying pans and purge the rest of my house, I think, in a minute. So yeah, cheers for that, Stu. Appreciate it. And thanks everyone else. If there's any sort of follow-up questions, don't hesitate to get in touch. Give me a call. And yeah, happy to follow up with you thereafter.
Brilliant. Thanks everyone.
Thank you. Thanks.
Cheers. Thank you.
Bye bye.
Cheers. See ya.